on How the Business is Played. I am Charece Williams, joined
And,
with.
I'm Monica McNutt.
All right, y'all. So we're going to make this super quick for you this time. One thing I want you to know is we want to be real time and authentic with the feedback that we give you, right? And so we asked last week after we dropped our first podcast, and thank you so much for all of the love, the texts, the likes, the comments, the shares. We really appreciate it. But two topics kept popping up that people wanted to hear from us women's sports and NCAA. And since women's sports, NCAA has really been dominating this past weekend, and we got a couple more games to watch here. We're going to make this short and sweet and get in and talk about it super fast. So first of all, just want to shout out, while we're not here to talk about what's really happening on the court per se, we all saw that Juju Watkins got hurt and she tore her ACL. And for anyone that's been injured, we know that can be a really hard journey. And so we definitely wish her well and hope that her recovery is as speedy as it can be. But on the flip side of things, when injuries happen, transfers happen, all those sorts of things, it does typically have an impact on what happens to them from a marketing standpoint. So I would love, Monica, to get your take on Juju and her injury and how you think it may or may not impact her marketability, the thing that she's doing. And I'll touch on transfer portal real quick.
Yeah, so of course we all saddened by it and wish her a speedy and healthy recovery. But I won't say immediately, but my next thought shortly after that, once you get the devastating news, was her story of her comeback and how she has an opportunity to connect with fans on a different level and to spur a larger conversation about women's sports and the way that women's bodies function, right? I can remember being in college and our sports conditioning trainer, Mike Hill, he said it to us. He's like, look, there's a different propensity for women to have ACL injuries based on hip-knee ratio, all these things. And I was in school, I graduated in 2011, Charece, so this was being discussed then. I am not going to assume that the strength and conditioning staffs are not doing their due diligence, but I think a larger conversation about ACL injuries in women's sports, particularly in basketball, could all be spurred behind Juju's comeback. And I also think that it's another chance for fans to get to know her on a deeper level as she decides to share this comeback. Now, the flip side of the coin for that, I will fully acknowledge, is that this could be very private. And she will have the autonomy to decide what she will and will not share. I think immediately of like Klay Thompson coming back from ACL and him talking about how challenging it was. Jamal Murray, same thing. Like guys talking about how challenging it has been. Even Rory Herman, when Texas punched their ticket to the Final Four, talking about her comeback from her injury as well, how challenging that can be. So I do have space for the challenges of a comeback, but I also think she has an incredible opportunity to continue to inspire on a deeper level.
Oh, I really love that. And when I think about, brands and their relationships with athletes, and Nike already jumped in, right? Like immediately in terms of just having, some creative, just to kind of acknowledge that she got hurt and that they're behind her. I think that it's really interesting for brands that are not endemic to the sport, that are trying to connect, that they find storylines that maybe their consumers can relate to. So again, a comeback story and overcoming, to the extent that she wants to share it, can be something that, her partners can be a part of to help tell the story and promote it in a way that, again, both parties win. Not to capitalize over injury, but in terms of like just bringing the other side of the person, not just the athlete, to the table, is something that a lot of brands are trying to connect with. And some conversations I was in this week were around on the opposite side of that. She's unfortunately going to be out due to an injury. And there's some people who are not going to be playing with their teams next season because they're choosing to transfer. So really quick, not everyone knows this, right? But look, like literally minutes ago, we saw that Olivia Miles is entering the transfer portal. And so a lot of people don't realize that the laws around NIL are laws that are being governed by the state that the student athlete is playing in, right? So these deals don't automatically transfer, with a student athlete when they leave the school that they are in. So I raised that because people are just kind of wondering how this all works. Do you have a multi-year deal? No matter what school do you play at, do you have it? Not necessarily. Some of those things have to be renegotiated whenever you go to the next place. And again, I love that, for the student athlete, because maybe the price went up and maybe this next year, a brand might need to play a little bit more for that deal.
And on that note, I think it's important to call out NIL opportunities and a school's collective, right? They sometimes are operating from the same pot, but other times that can be two different entities. And entering the transfer portal does not necessarily mean that one will transfer. It's sort of like testing the waters, see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Olivia Miles, Tanaya Latson is another name that I saw pop up out of FSU that I was like, whoa, these players could end up with their same teams if they don't find a good fit. But the transfer portal is very much the way of the world, the way things go in the NCAA currently.
Yeah, it's man, these coaches, they have a different job nowadays. I was talking to a head coach of a different sport the other day, and we were talking about all her duties and the fundraising aspect of things. Because, right, we know that now there's going to be a revenue share in college athletics, but we suspect where the money's going to go, right? Football, men's basketball, maybe women's basketball, maybe women's volleyball, maybe gymnastics, who knows? But they have this fundraising as a part of their jobs. There's a lot happening in college athletics. So related to that, this year, good news for the women's tournament, and that this year they are able to participate in a revenue share, which is something that wasn't happening before. So now we're seeing that with every school. I believe every school that's in the tournament, as they win, there's a pot of money that's going back into the conference. So do we think, I don't know, what are your thoughts about what this could do for a women's program or for a conference, when they have this revenue share happening?
Well, there was always a conference share. Does this revenue share trickle down to the players, though?
Ooh. Does the revenue share trickle down to the players?
Well,
because down to the teams.
To the schools. The schools.
Yes.
Right. So that's always been sort of a part of the fabric of how the NCAA works. The schools and the conferences get a slice, depending on how well a team does. I shouldn't say always, but as long as I've been covered, and that was kind of thing. I thought you were about to tell me it's trickling down to the players, which I was like, wow, look at us getting real forward thinking in terms of this NIL space. But you know what, Charece, on that note, though, I do think that's part of the reason why we've had these ginormous conferences that don't make any geographical sense, because everybody's trying to get a piece of the pie. And I know on the men's side, there's conversation, and I think it was powered by Rick Pitino and Dan Hurley about the Big East merging to some extent with the ACC. I remember that conversation percolating about 2 weeks ago, coming off the end of conference tournaments. But, all of that is tied back to wanting to be attached to the conference that's winning just to share that revenue.
Yes. And to clarify, I believe the major difference between this year and last year is that the percentage that the women's team is getting is closer or either matching what the men's teams were getting. So they were getting a smaller percentage before. Now they're getting whatever that number is.
Okay.
But anyway, that's a big difference because now it pours more money into it. And now they can actually, I think an article just came out last week around how South Carolina's women's basketball team loses like $5 million a year, right? Because it costs money to be that sort of team. But that's because they're not able to bring in as much. So it's just, anyway, this revenue share can definitely change the way the bottom line's looking there.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we're talking about athletes and while we're talking NCAA, like obviously some major names are still playing. Everyone's talking about, Paige Beckers, and she's on right now. So I know we want to get to watch that. So we're talking about her and her marketability. So she's in several commercials right now as well. There was an interesting article from The Guardian, and I was surprised that they come out this week, but there's an interesting article around her and kind of comparing how Middle America really took to Caitlin Clark. And how she kind of was that underdog. She got to the Final Four, got to the championship, didn't win, and how they took to her and adopted her. And then how Paige Beckers, who is not getting the same sort of love, from Middle America. And there's a question in their mind around it's whether or not it's because she is also an advocate and ally, for Black women. She famously, when she won the ESPY, talked about, the Black women in her life and who have really pioneered the league. I thought it was a really interesting take, just kind of comparing the two. Would love just thoughts on true, not true, BS, stirring the pot. What you think?
I think there's some truth to it, but let's take a step back and look at it practically, right? Iowa, Caitlin Clark powered Iowa to being a darling of sorts. They're not a team that you think of traditionally when you think of powerhouses. I believe, Steve Vivian Stringer was at Iowa State when she did her thing, was doing her thing, I believe. No, I think it might have been Iowa. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on that. I should Google that real quick. But historically, they are not one of the juggernauts of women's college basketball in the way that UConn is. So I think there is both the literal geographical location, the hometown girl, the underdog element. Like there were all of these things coming together. And of course, the terrific basketball play, all of these things coming together, and the timing and the climate of Caitlin Clark. And I, Charece, am still of the camp that part of Caitlin Clark's story and ascension was exactly was a byproduct of the contrast of Angel Reese and LSU. Like that took it over the top, right? So there's one piece of it, right? Then if you look at Paige, okay, from Minnesota, played at UConn, people are tired of UConn winning all the time. And yes, she has been very vocal and forthright about the things that she stands on. So to me, sure, there's some truth to that. I don't think that either of those young women are hurt by their stances, because I believe that there's enough. And I think one thing that we've seen as a through line in women's basketball is this idea of authenticity. And so you would rather be able to operate in the fullness of who you are and what you stand on, and let the brands that truly align come to you, as opposed to just farming for dollars that you don't really necessarily need and you may not align with. So I don't think either. I would not use the language of Paige Bueckers being hurt, because what aligns with Paige and what she believes in, I believe, will find its way to her. I also think that Caitlin Clark is a supernova and a super talent. And as she continues to grow as a young woman and maybe finds her voice on certain issues that we haven't heard her from, I don't think that she's going to be hurt by it either. Like, I think there's a give and take. And I think as we look at women's sports, the give is always, I'm going to show up and be me. And then the chips fall where they may. And so while I think it's a fair and thoughtful way to go about it, I think that there are a number of reasons that have contributed to where we are, and some of the stars and the names that are most popular known in women's basketball.
Ooh, I love it. I love that. You're spot on. And when I think about Paige and like in the next level, again, like Caitlin's got a million things going on. She's doing extremely well from a marketability standpoint. I do think that this will be really interesting for Paige to kind of step into that role. There are some other allies in the league, like Kelsey Plum is, one of those ones that is definitely a strong advocate that like really talks and is outspoken. So I'm excited to see. Knowing the WNBA fan base has been sensitive, the fans that have been there for a long time, sensitive to these issues. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Paige, given her basketball, acumen, as well as her ability to really connect with a wide range of people, how this could really work for her. So it will be fun to watch her continue to evolve as a marketing talent. And one interesting deal that she did that can kind of give us a chance to kind of talk about Unrivaled finally, right? So she was one of those ones that came in and I believe invested into the league. And for those that don't know, part of the reason we got here is because Monica and I were in Unrivaled and we were talking about what we saw there. Right. So we saw this really, really dope and space that was really authentic and already had traditions built in with the fans and this really quick season. Beautiful space, really well done. Lots of technology, players having a ball. They're super accessible and close. It was really nice. And we were talking about the sponsors that were rolling through that we could see kind of their integration on court, but then also see what was happening beforehand, before you even walked into the actual basketball area of the thing. So, and we're just saying how unique this was, and it was only in Miami. So I know people are talking about it right now. Should this league be on the road so other people can experience it? Is it great where it is? Because we know that the players love it. Sponsors, how they feel about it. I haven't talked to any sponsors yet. But Monica, I think we should illuminate some of that conversation a little bit and get into it.
Well, first of all, shout out to the whole Unrivaled team. What they did was special, spectacular, a great first year, formative year, foundation year, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, we pulled up and the sponsorships are everywhere. From the referees' jerseys, players' jerseys, to the bench, to the lounge, to the DJ booth, there's sponsorships everywhere. And so it's all these brands that seemingly want to get involved in women's basketball. And so you wonder, one, what kind of deals did these brands sign with the league? Because I actually know someone with the New York Liberty, and they have said that they no longer are accepting one-offs. If you want to be in, you got to be in and ride the wave. So I do wonder about that thought process. But two, I think about the growth of that league and its potential. It is arrived at an interesting time as the WNBA is a year out from renegotiating their new CBA. And so this league has offered a standard in terms of being treated like a first-class professional athlete, as opposed to just going with what you get because that's all that's given. And so I think this generation
Mhm.
of athlete is now coming into this thing with a standard that's not just about themselves, but also about generations to come in terms of what they expect and how they expect to be treated as professionals.
Oh my God. Yes, yes, and yes. And from a sponsor perspective, I think one thing that jumped out to me was that obviously it was a really intimate venue, right? So I don't have the numbers in front of me about how many folks flowed through. But as you and I know, as we were looking for our tickets, there were
Mm-hmm.
not a lot to be found, right? People were buying them for the season or buying all the sessions and everything. But a lot of times with sponsorships, people are looking at who can feel and touch the product and kind of build the relationship with those that are coming through. If you're a
Mm-hmm.
brand that's selling your product there, Under Armour comes to mind, like you're thinking about like the sales you can get. And then obviously the exposure that you get from, media and like the television, like all those things together can really help paint the story for a brand. So I think that at least if I'm thinking about it, like obviously the feet on the ground were kept. And I don't know if the league's going to expand to bigger venues or if they're going to keep it to where it always sells out and it has that sort of factor, like try to get in here sort of thing or not. But it's just something for brands to think about. So I hope, like your contact the Liberty said, I hope that there was multi-year deals that were done because I do think that you also need to commit. People can't be in here moonlighting, speed dating with people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You really want
Mm-hmm.
to get in there and ensure that the league can depend on you, that the players can depend
Mm-hmm.
on you. Because in order for it to succeed, it has to have that constant level of connection and money flowing in. To be honest.
I agree.
Yeah. Speaking of money, so last topic we can talk real quick is just obviously ownership in women's sports. Like that's starting to be a conversation, and I think there's been a lot of buzz with the NWSL in particular in
Mm-hmm.
terms of celebrities. LAFC kind of started that trend. Not LAFC. Angel City kind of
Angel
started
City, yep.
right? And then now you're seeing all over San Diego, Tim's coming in and whatnot. So I feel like we started that trend. And now Serena very recently came on board as a part owner of the new Toronto WNBA club. So obviously this is the thing, right? You're seeing more women investing in sport, not just men investing in ownership. What do you think this can look like for women, for the leagues to see the women kind of putting their money behind this?
Charece, I'm still watching and waiting, and I want to see this one play out because there's a lot of women. I think Angel Reese is a part of the group
Mm-hmm.
in DC.
DC.
Sabrina
Yep.
Ionescu just announced that she's a part of a NWSL group about a month ago. There are the other thing to me, and I'll be honest, I'm not an accountant numbers person, but what is the percent? What are the percentages? Serena obviously is a big deal. Like she's in it, right? But I think for
Mm-hmm.
some of these smaller investments in some of these groups, like what does that necessarily mean? Now, I will say that to our point of what we just said in terms of talking about sponsors signing on for multi-year deals, it is a bold sign and a bid and a bet on women, so to speak, for the future. I think to see all of these women coming to the table, and so that is empowering. I would also like to believe that you then have an ownership group that is truly mindful of serving its athlete because of the symmetry and lived experience. Um, but I'm really curious to see how this one really plays out because again, what are those percentages, and how much will the owners be connected to the experience of the players in terms of impacting decision making facilities, so on and so forth.
I love that. And you're spot on, right? Because as we all know, kind of whoever has more money and, more skin in the game, whatever, oftentimes has a louder voice or more influence, right? So it is a good question around whether or not they're going to be able to make the impact just based on like the dollars that they're putting in. But just
Mm-hmm.
using the Liberty as an example, like just seeing how that ownership has transformed in terms of having a woman really kind of being at the helm and how she's looked at the team and looked after the team and seeing them flourish into a
Yeah.
WNBA champion, right? So I think there's something to be said. And that was going to be my point too, around getting women around the table, around these
Mm-hmm.
decision-making tables, around the influence, around all that sort of stuff, because that's where you can really make those decisions early that can change the course and trajectory of a team, of a league, of an athlete experience. So I love to see it, whether it's celebrity women, whether it's somebody else who, can make some money. I love to see that because I do think that we think differently when we get the chance to really put our heads together, get some things.
Indeed.
So with that, we again want to keep it short and sweet this time. As always, if you have any questions, comments, opinions, please let us know. And thank you for tuning in. See you next week.